and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Ladi Akeridunduale. The headlines. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says his army has liberated 41 settlements in the south of the country. The United States conducts, quote, provocative Arctic missile test aimed at Russia. And Microsoft blames Russian military-linked hackers for ransomware attacks in Poland and Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukrainian forces have liberated 41 settlements as they advance through the south of the country. He said that the focus for liberated areas would be demining and making them safe for people to return. He adds that he expected Russian forces to leave landmines in the area around Kherson as they also withdraw from that southern city.
Today we have good news from the south. There are already dozens of Ukrainian flags returning to their rightful place within the scope of the ongoing defense operation. 41 settlements have been liberated. I thank all our heroes who make the advances possible. In fact, those who restore all conditions for a normal life go to the liberated areas immediately after our soldiers. The first and basic thing is the mining. The occupiers leave behind thousands of unexploded mines and ammunition. I've often heard estimates that clearing Ukraine of Russian mines will take decades. We can't wait that long. We have to do in years what elsewhere in the world could take decades after fighting.
Meanwhile, an analyst says Russian forces have likely laced the city of Kherson with explosives as they withdraw from the Ukrainian city in a significant setback. Kiev has remained wary of the withdrawal, and one senior advisor to the Ukrainian president said Russia wanted to turn Kherson into a, quote, city of death. European Security Research Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, Edward Arnold, believes it is unlikely the retreat is a trap being set by the Russians for advancing Ukrainian forces, but warned the city will likely be covered in explosives.
No, I mean, there's no significant indications to say that this would be a trap of any operational or strategic significance. I just think Russia is actually not that clever at the moment in terms of what they can do in their military operations. However, tactically, I mean, the city is likely to be laced with improvised explosive devices, and it'll take a significant amount of time for the Ukrainians to clear routes in and out of the city, but also clear the buildings. And I suppose Russia would have tried to do that to further degrade Ukrainian forces, but ensure that Ukrainian forces can't quickly follow up their advance into Kherson city itself. It is significant and it's expected. The Ukrainian shaping for this counteroffensive started within August, and the Russian position was always looked quite untenable in the south. And their significance could grow because the Russians have to be able to withdraw in a controlled manner. Withdrawal in contact is probably the hardest military operation to do from a command and control perspective. And they also have a river crossing within that, which makes it much more difficult. So actually the significance could become greater if the Russians lose forces or greater number of forces than they expect in that area. And it's significant because of the geography for Ukraine. It protects their southeastern coastline, it protects Mykolaiv, it protects Odessa, but it also means that there would then be no Russian forces west of the Dnieper River, which is significant. And it puts far more pressure on Crimea in the south, and also not only Crimea and the Russian forces there, but also the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And it protects a lot of, in terms of Ukrainian economy, and also its it's essentially the western half of the city. So it is a significant setback for the Russians, but the Russians were probably expecting it for quite a while. They still put forces in when it looked like Kherson was untenable, and because of where the river runs with the city, it was always going to be a very, very tall ask to be able to defend it this year. They've also achieved significant military objectives. Yes, the taking back of Kherson city, but also pretty significant victories in the east. And critically, that has put their ranged weapon systems, principally HIMARS, in range of a significant amount of Ukrainian territory that Russia currently holds. So when the weather gets worse, which is around now, and fighting largely goes static, they'll still continue to fight, but there won't be big changes on the map in the next 2 to 3 months. It means that the Ukrainians still have the capabilities to degrade Russian forces over those months, preparing for another offensive, which will start probably in February, March next year.
Edward Arnold of the European Security Research United Services Institute. And Ukraine's defense minister says it will take Russia at least a week to withdraw its troops from the southern city of Kherson, and that winter would slow down battlefield operations, giving both sides a chance to regroup. In an interview in Kiev, Oleksiy Rezhnikov said Russia had 40,000 troops in Kherson region, and that it still had forces within the city itself and around it, as well as on the west bank of the vast Dnipro River, despite announcing their retreat. Russia had announced it would withdraw from the west bank of the Dnipro River. That includes Kherson city, the only regional capital Moscow has captured since invading Ukraine in February.
For the real analysis, we have to see the real movement of the units or the platoons in Kherson district. And according to our intelligence data, they didn't started their real movement, for example, from the Kherson. And we see them still in city and around the city and in the western bank of the Dnipro River as well. And we know that they have all kind of their military groups, approximately 40,000 personnel in Kherson district. It's a huge quantity of the personnel. So just imagine 40,000 people with the equipment, weaponry, armed vehicles, tanks, etc., etc. So it's not that easy to withdraw these troops from the Kherson during 1 day or 2 days, as minimum 1 week, because the weather conditions, it's a main obstacle for all military campaign. If it's rainy, you have to stay, because you cannot use the wheel armed vehicles or personal carriers. You can use only with the tracks. If it's snowy, the same answer. If it's not snowy, but you have a frozen, you have a hard ground, you can use wheeled vehicles. So it will depend on the weather conditions at the next stage of this campaign. You know that then you have like a neighbor, the monkey with the grenade, you always will have some kind of risks. But my personal assessment that the blowing up the dam, it's very stupid idea, because if you will check the landscape in this district, you will find that western bank of Dnipro River has a more higher relief. Terrain. On the east bank of Dnipro River is the lowest level of terrain. It means that the water will flow on the left side or on the east side of this bank, and they will have risk for their troops. So it's absolutely stupid idea. So I think that it's the next example of their bluffing, as they did it before with the different other kind of threats.
Oleksiy Rezhnikov, Ukraine's defense minister. Let's talk now to Peter Dickinson, publisher of both the Business Ukraine magazine and Lviv Today, the editor of the Odessa Review. He joins us from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Good morning to you, Peter. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Nice to join you.
Let's, in all of this war situation, very little is said about how business is proceeding, if indeed business is proceeding in Ukraine. Everyday shops, supermarkets, suppliers, wholesalers, retailers, and all of that, as well as transportation and all of that. What do you think is happening? What is really happening in Kiev, where you are? Is it business as usual? Pardon the phrase, for much of the city and the country.
No, it's certainly not business as usual for obvious reasons. There is a semblance of normality. If you were to enter Kiev and go around the city centre, you would see shops, bars and restaurants open. You would see a lot of people going about their business. Offices are working. A lot of companies are working as per normal. But of course, even in Kiev, which is a long way from the front lines, there are regular power cuts due to Russia's campaign of bombing Ukraine's civilian infrastructure. So most parts of Kiev are subjected to power cuts from 4 to 8 hours a day. So periodically, power will seem to be cut out. There are also air raids regularly. When air raids happen, most shops will shut. Paradoxically, perhaps a lot of restaurants don't close. But these obviously are hugely disruptive factors. So even though there is a sense of just getting on with life amongst the Ukrainian population, of people just wanting to get on with their lives and continuing with their businesses, there are huge disruptions, even in cities that are not on the front line like Kiev. So it's challenging, and economically, the situation in general is very difficult. A lot of people have lost their jobs as well.
Yes, I was actually going to go there because I was going to talk about unemployment. Quite a number of factories, industries have had to shut down for obvious reasons, as you said. So the stats aren't looking too good in terms of revenue profiles, things like tax collection, and then, of course, people spending to be able to ensure that the economy is continues to flow, as it were. In that kind of situation, how much of the fallout has business itself gotten, even though they're not directly involved, but how much of a fallout have they gotten? Because even if they can and when they can produce, there isn't simply the market here.
Well, the figures that we have suggest a very sharp economic decline in general. The estimates that are currently available suggest that the GDP of Ukraine this year will contract by between 30 and 40%, which is obviously a huge drop. The main single significant blow to businesses that are not on the front lines, that have not been physically attacked or affected by the war, that have not been destroyed, in other words, is probably the blockade of Ukraine's ports by the Russian forces. Ukraine is a very heavily export-dependent economy. The vast majority of Ukrainian exports have traditionally gone through the southern ports on the Black Sea coast. That's industrial exports, commodities, and primarily agricultural exports. Now, since February, they've been largely blockaded. A deal was agreed in the summer to allow certain types of grain exports to continue to flow through Odessa, but that's only a small part of the overall volumes that traditionally did go through that part of the country. So by blocking off the export markets, by blocking off the export routes, they've essentially shut down a significant part of the economy. The service sector is still very active in most Ukrainian cities, but the industrial sector, the export sectors are essentially now on life support.
The situation would, of course, require, I mean, it's been said publicly that the situation will require possibly decades of reconstruction eventually when the conflict is over, whichever way it ends. But already a lot has been made of a significant amount of help and fund coming from Western powers, particularly the United States and and the United Kingdom, amongst others, and then, of course, the European Union. What has that gone into, and how much of a difference is it able to make to the current situation?
Well, the aid that has come from America and the United Kingdom has primarily been military aid, security aid. So that has gone directly to the front. That has helped the country to defend itself. The European Union has offered more diverse aid, certainly in terms of economic support. And all of Ukraine's partners have been providing economic support in parallel to security backing. Most of that at this stage has gone directly into social payments, pensions, support for for state employees, salaries, etc., to essentially just to keep the state operating, keep the state functioning, so it can be seen almost as a subsistence level of support to give Ukraine the minimum to be able to make sure that the organs of state, the institutions of state, and the basic functions of state are able to continue in this current environment where Ukraine has major budget deficits and shortfalls. So the money is basically coming in and being eaten up straight away by these expenses, just to keep things ticking over while the war continues. Now, you mentioned the reconstruction and the long-term plans. Certainly, the objective looking ahead will be a massive reconstruction project. Again, the numbers you hear bandied around are enormous. We're talking about perhaps hundreds of billions of dollars, certainly, perhaps up to $1 trillion. That's going to be something that will be on the agenda for years, probably many years, after the end of the war. But of course, it's too early to talk about that yet. The war is far from over.
You're a publisher, and in that regard, how easy have you found it, given the conditions? I know a lot of publishers like you have, of course, migrated online, and that possibly makes the avoidance of some of the more logistic challenges that would have come from physically printing and distributing material. But how easy has it been, especially because we heard at some point Starlink's owner, Elon Musk, saying that, look, they've been providing this service for free, but somebody's got to pay for it. But of course, that was settled when he decided that they would continue to pay for it. But that was just one of the inputs into the kind of job that you do.
Specifically, my business is essentially on hold. We've moved online. My magazines, the physical magazines, we have not published since February, since the war began. We distribute my magazines are distributed throughout the cities where we publish. And of course, that's not a viable option at the moment. We have no way of knowing what venues will be open or not, whether they'll be accessible, and whether there will be any advertising market of any size to be able to partner with us. So essentially, we've had to make the decision at the beginning of the war to just put everything on hold. I think that's the case with most print publications, at least as far as I'm aware. Having said that, the online sector is very, very dynamic because there's huge international interest in Ukraine. We've seen that sharp rises in audience levels, certainly at my own publications, and I've known, speaking to other people in the media sector, they've experienced the similar trends because the war has, of course, generated enormous international interest in Ukraine and enormous traffic to Ukrainian sites. But the media sector is one of many sectors which I'm sure I speak for my colleague by saying that it's been pretty much devastated by the conflict, and we're all just hoping to pick up the pieces once it's over. Until the war finishes, I don't see many prospects at all, certainly in my section of the industry.
You are in Kiev, and you had referenced it in your answer to one of the earlier questions, where you said it's quite far from the front line of the conflict. But then you also said that doesn't mean that you don't get the effects of the fact that there is a conflict. What is day-to-day living like in terms of being able to take your ATM card to the machine and get some funds? You talked about restaurants staying open. How easy is it to sit out there knowing fully well that at any point in time that air raid siren could go on? Are schools open? Are you able to, more or less live your life day to day? Or are you really continuously concerned? Is there a certain tension in that city about safety and security? We see President Zelensky every day, so we know that he is there, but I mean, he's physically present, and we see dignitaries pass through. But what is it like living there?
Well, I think there is a remarkable resilience amongst the Ukrainian people that they've shown during this war, and there's a very conscious determination not to let the war disrupt lives and derail lives, and to essentially not to let Russia win in that sense. So life does go on, but there are a lot of so everyday details. Some of the things you mentioned, yes, the bank machines still work. Ukraine has a very sophisticated, perhaps surprisingly sophisticated, digital finance sector, digital banking sector, and it's still possible to continue in that, to make all your payments online or through your cards or through your phones, in fact. And restaurants, shops, bars, hotels are all operational, more or less fully. But then on the other hand, yes, you do have bomb scares many days of the week. When a bomb scare happens, people generally are advised to take cover. Some do, some don't, but shops shut. So you may be in a place where they just say, sorry, excuse me, we can't serve you now because of the bomb scare, you must leave premises, for example. I was in a restaurant with my family the other day when the electricity cut out. The restaurant staff brought out candles and everyone just continued as normal, and about 10 minutes later they managed to reconnect via a generator. So it's always there, you're always aware of it, and because of the nature of the war, because of especially the last month of fairly indiscriminate Russian airstrikes, nobody can really totally dismiss the dangers, even in cities like Kiev. But there is a sense of just getting on with things. There is a resilience, there is a determination that people will push ahead and will not allow this to totally disrupt or dictate to them, to their lives.
Indeed. Peter Dickinson, I have just one final question for you. I mean, my viewers who are watching this will know that from your name, you're not Ukrainian. So if you're staying in Ukraine with your family that you've just mentioned, how are those family members who are not in Ukraine, how are they taking the fact that you remain there, even though I assume you have the option of leaving?
Yes, of course. I'm British. You're quite correct. I'm not a native Ukrainian. I'm British, and of course we could leave. We could travel back to Britain or elsewhere. We did leave initially when the war began, but we chose to come home. This is my home. I've lived here many years. My family, my children were born here. My wife is from Kyiv, and frankly, we missed it very much, and we wanted to come home. Home is where the heart is. I think my family understands that. They visited many times here. They know how fond I am, how dear Ukraine is to me. It's also become very important and very special place for them. So, in all honesty, all hardships aside, I consider it to be a real privilege to be in Ukraine at this time, and to see the incredible heroism and courage of these people, and see them win their war, see them defend themselves. And we are witnessing a very historic period, a sort of nation-building period now taking place in Ukraine that, frankly, is humbling to see.
Peter Dickinson, thank you so much for your perspective at this time. Let me wish you well, and along with the family, continue to stay safe. We'll come back to you. We have a more robust discussion, particularly about the economic benefits that could come from this fairly grim situation. But for now, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
After the break, power cuts, another worry for Ukraine's critically ill. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Footage shows Ukrainian soldiers with a Ukrainian flag in the village of Kherson in the Kherson region. Ukrainian officials have so far mostly been wary in public, warning that Russians may still be planning to sow destruction on their way out. Russia denies it abuses civilians despite bombarding residential areas throughout the conflict. It has evacuated thousands of civilians from the Kherson area in recent weeks in what Ukraine says included illegal forced deportations. Kiev's forces have made significant advances in recent weeks through the Kherson province, gateway to the Crimean Peninsula that Russia annexed in 2014. And more reactions on Russia's pullout from Kherson. The United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says Russia's announcement to withdraw its troops from Kherson was a, quote, militarily significant milestone for the Ukrainians. At a news briefing in the White House, Mr. Sullivan says the move would not mean the end of the war, but that the U.S. continues to support Ukraine with security assistance packages, including air defense systems.
This is a significant military milestone for the Ukrainians if, in fact, it happens that Russia follows through and withdraws to the far side of the Dnieper River. Of course, we're going to watch actions and not just announcements to see what actually unfolds. We do see some indications of movement consistent with what the announcements were yesterday, but this is an involved operation. The Russians had flowed a significant number of forces and personnel into Kherson City and to the west side of the Dnieper River. So it's not the kind of thing you just snap your fingers and it's done. But of course, it's not the end of the war, because Russia continues to occupy parts of Ukrainian territory. We are continuing to support the Ukrainians in their effort to defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity. And as the president said yesterday, we're guided by a very simple principle: nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. It is ultimately up to Ukraine to make determinations about its diplomatic course. It is our job to put them in the best position on the battlefield so that when and if there is an opportunity for diplomacy, they're in the best position at the bargaining table. The United States is not pressuring Ukraine. We're not insisting on things with Ukraine. What we are doing is consulting as partners and showing our support, not just through public statements or moral support, but through the tangible physical support of the kind of military assistance I mentioned before. Today, the United States will be announcing another package of security assistance for Ukraine, including important air defense contributions like missiles for Hawk air defense systems, as well as 4 U.S. Avenger air defense systems that come equipped with Stinger missiles. This equipment will complement other air defense contributions announced by our allies and partners in the context of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group that Secretary Austin chairs. So first on the PRC, we have not, since President Biden and President Xi spoke some months ago, seen the PRC providing military equipment, weapons for use on the battlefield in Ukraine. And we have not seen kind of wholesale efforts to backfill or undermine the sanctions regime, though, of course, the PRC has continued its economic relationship with Russia over the course of the past many months. Sorry, guys.
Russian media says the U.S. military tested an experimental cruise missile launch system above the Arctic Circle yesterday. The commander in charge of the test called it a deliberately provocative move aimed at deterring Russia. The operation involved dropping a long-range cruise missile from a special operations C-130 transport aircraft with parachutes, slowing its descent until its rocket motor blasted it towards a target. The deployment system, called Rapid Dragon by the military, was developed by the U.S. Air Force, and Wednesday marked its first demonstration in Europe. Meanwhile, a Western media says the U.S. observed Russian naval vessels preparing for a possible test of a nuclear-powered torpedo, which was new to Russia in recent weeks. According to senior U.S. officials, amongst the vessels which took part in preparations was the Belgorod, a cruise missile submarine modified for special operations that is able to launch unmanned underwater vehicles, including the Poseidon torpedo. In the last week, the vessels were observed leaving the testing area in the Arctic Sea and heading back to port without carrying out a test. The U.S. believes the Russians may have encountered technical difficulties. And hackers linked to Russia's military were very likely behind ransomware attacks last month on Ukrainian and Polish transportation and logistic organizations, and that's according to Microsoft. The revelation will raise concerns in Washington and Europe's capitals that allies supporting Ukraine against Russia's invasion could face greater cyber threats from Moscow. Poland is a NATO member and a key conduit for supplying military aid to Ukraine. A Microsoft spokesperson says the hacks did cause damage at the transportation and logistics companies in Poland and Ukraine, but the extent was unclear. Microsoft attributed the hacks to a group that the Justice Department alleges works on behalf of Russia's GRU military intelligence agency and which caused power blackouts in parts of Ukraine in 2015 and 2016. One of Ukraine's main cybersecurity agencies, the State Special Communications Service, declined comments. All right, now let's talk to Laddie Williams of our business desk at this time. Take a look at some of the figures and some of the action. Hi, Laddie. Morning.
Good morning. Thank God it's Friday.
Yes, thank God it's Friday. UK sanctions on Russia are now more than 18 billion pounds.
Massive. Massive 18 billion pounds. And obviously it's to weaken, the Russian, warhead at this time. And, we've seen these sanctions about 1,200, Russians, including oligarchs, and some people
with
that
billions in assets and all that.
Exactly. And, we saw the story there with a former Chelsea owner, Roman Abramovich.
That alone was several
massive.
billions.
That was massive. And we also had the nickel king, Vladimir Putin. All of these people, they've been heavily, sanctioned. And, it raises the risk of, having those cross-border, investments, because you need to be sure, that your country is in good terms, with other countries, so that your assets are not...
Don't get caught in the crossfire between both.
So we're seeing, all of these sanctions, ramping up. And the UK is actually indicating that they will continue, to ramp up.
So there might be even more to come.
There's more to come at the end of the day. As long as the war continues and, Russia remains on the other side, these sanctions will continue to be hammered.
Speaking about sanctions, the United States is downgrading Russia from a market economy status. What does that mean?
So the market economy status is more like an anti-dumping, law, with your trading partners to make sure that they don't dump goods, in your country at unfair prices. Because we see, how, Russia is able to sell oil, cheap oil, to a country like India. So the U.S. is ramping up, bringing them, downgrading them from that market economy status to make sure they can, fully, explore that anti-dumping law with them to, at the end of this is still to, stop those practices, bringing goods into the country, at prices that are distorted. So it's another big move by the U.S. This time, and obviously it's going to impact the Russian economy. They're not going to be able to, dump some of those goods at, those kind of prices that, India has been enjoying with the cheap oil. And so this transcends to other goods, in the market.
The U.S. Consumer Price Index rose less than expected in October. How are the markets reacting?
Yeah, big jump. Big jump in the markets yesterday. We saw the NASDAQ about 6% off. That's the biggest jump I've seen, in recent times. And at the end of the day, it's because it was still a rise, but it was lower, than expected. Indeed. So that's why we saw the markets, investors, quickly jumped on that. They've been looking for that kind of indication that will show that, inflation is peaking. Because if inflation is peaking, that means the jumbo rate hikes by the Fed would have to draw back a bit. And we saw the dollar index actually react to that. The dollar has been on a massive aggressive run, this year. We saw it, cool down.
Against virtually everyone.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, the markets reacted positively. The NASDAQ, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, even markets in Europe, reacted positively to this CPI data, and surprisingly, the crypto market too. That reacted positively too. We saw Bitcoin jumped about $17,000, Ethereum, and most altcoins. Even though we still have that issue with Binance and FTX still weighing on the market, investors shrugged that off and focused on the CPI data, and we saw the crypto market looking in the green. looking like it's going to end Friday, on a good note, even though it's been a turbulent week, for the crypto market. So it's a good sign, but analysts are still saying that, it doesn't mean, they're out of the woods yet, because inflation could still, somehow start to rise again. And maybe the Fed might not see this as a good enough reason to cut down, on the jumbo hikes. But at the end of the day, the market wants what it wants.
It does. It does. I will be keeping an eye on what it wants. Laddie will be keeping an eye on what it wants throughout the day. First, immediately after this show on Business Money. Thanks, Laddie.
Thank you.
And still staying on that track, let's talk now to the Chief Executive Officer of BIC Consultancy, Economic and Business Development Consultant, Dr. Boniface Chizia. He's speaking of Zoom from Lekki in Lagos. Good morning to you, Dr. Chizia. Thank you for your time.
Laddie, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. Yes. Yes.
We have had significant difficulties, and when I say we, I'm talking about starting now from a Nigerian perspective with what has happened with the war in Ukraine. We're not combatants there, but we're feeling the impact, the wheat exports and the rise in prices of commodities, but then also in terms of energy prices, and in spite of the subsidy that government says it is paying, the prices are rising. Petrol has gone to about 200 naira in the nation's commercial capital, as well as other places. It's even higher in other places. This has had impact on our economic indices, but how bad is it?
Well, I think that what has actually affected us more. Certainly, Russian-Ukraine war has affected us. But what affected us is the rate of exchange. I think that's for me, that's a telling parameter. It's affected us drastically, and it got compounded, with this notification that we're going to change our currency notes. So, and then those who are in illegal position of naira, who just stockpiled outside the banking system, you are all in a rush to have it converted to dollars. And so there was a demand pressure on available dollar, and the rates were falling through the roof. And our economy is to a large extent, highly dependent on importation. And so once that started to happen, you want to see prices gyrating. And obviously that's not good for us, because it undermines macroeconomic stability, which is in fact one of the major goals which the central bank tries to pursue.
On the other hand, I mean, while we're having this difficulty on this hand, on the other hand, there is, of course, the revenue challenge, which is also related to energy, talking about crude oil theft and all the associated issues, and the fact that even though Nigeria had a robust quota that is allocated to it, oil prices went very, very high in the aftermath of the start of the war in Ukraine. But we couldn't take advantage because we weren't able to pump out enough into the market. In that regard, how much impact has that had on the economy? Because, our country is wholly dependent on that. At least I can say, without being an economist, that one of the places that's had impact is on the foreign exchange rates. The naira has crashed against the big world currencies.
Well, I think that revenue challenge has been with us for a long time. It's not something that just started. It's so compounded that the fiscal authorities are much in a position to, the revenue we earn is not sufficient, to service our debts. Just servicing, so that has been the challenge. So that's why you hear the Minister of Finance say that we don't have a debt problem. What we have is a revenue problem. And I think that it's compounded. So one, it's like chicken, a dollar, and I was going to say 12 and 1 dozen. So I think that it's the same problem. We have revenue challenge in the sense that, like you said earlier on, we have the golden goose that brings in the revenue, which is oil, has not been doing so for quite some time. And so if you don't have revenue flow in, then you're going to have some difficulties. Also, fiscal authorities are not doing terribly well in terms of mobilizing, non-oil revenue, so all the taxes and tariffs and so on and so forth. we still have some distance, to cover in that regard. And so it's a compounded situation. So, our tax to GDP ratio is probably the least within the sub-region. So we need to have to do something about it, not from the perspective of trying to hike the tax rates. No, but what we need to do is to broaden, the tax nets so that many more people get into the tax and so on and so forth. We begin to pay tax. We expect that with this currency change, that if it's handled proficiently, that we'll be able to gain some intelligence, that would help us in this direction. I would expect that our agencies, that security agencies and so on, should be able to collect data. So if somebody comes and is deposited large sums of naira, to exchange, then the person should be explaining. Not immediately. We'll do it with some. We should be subtle about it. The person should be able to explain how much tax he has paid. But of course, Central Bank has put a cap to say that you're not able to deposit more than 5 million naira at a time. So I think that there are challenges for all concerned.
All of this is, of course, when you talk about compounding, and as we had visuals of the naira as it is today on the screen a couple of moments ago. But when you talk about compounding, part of what has made this situation as bad as it is, possibly worse, is the situation with our debt profile. Of course, once our foreign exchange rates are affected, our revenue is affected, the debt becomes questionable in terms of sustainability. And now economists like yourselves have said, look, we need to prepare. The world is going to have a recession because of the situation as it is today with the war in Ukraine. Already, countries like the United Kingdom are beginning to feel it even faster than others. But eventually, it's going to catch up with us. How are we going to navigate all of this, knowing that we have no safety nets and we have high levels of negative economic indices?
Well, I think that what we'll have to do in the interim is to make sure we stay the course. We have to make sure that I'm glad that the FX is going to appreciate. I did a presentation which I did say that if you have foreign currency available, we should pump it into the power market. And yes, I know that the central bank has said it does not recognize the power market, and it does lacking in debt, is an illegal market, and so on and so forth. But it's the same system, the same economy. So to the extent that you have this diversion in rates, we had a situation where at some point in time, the rate of exchange was going to 900 something naira to the dollar, and that's not good enough, because what that does to the economy is that anybody who is in legitimate position who gets foreign exchange from the official window, there is so much temptation for you to take this to the power market, to a round trip, and just make it kill. So you don't add any productivity to the economy. So I think that I'm glad. I looked at the papers this morning. I think the rates have come down to about 700 something naira to the dollar. And I think that's and then the operators are beginning to complain, because and that's the way to go. One of the problems we had in the economy is the fact that it was very easy for you to take a bet on the rate of exchange. Now, I could just go in there and buy $5,000 and I'll keep it, knowing that come December when I sell it, I'm going to make more naira. Now this is happening now. That's a good thing. That's what most of us have clamored for. That we should make that the psychology of the market, make the rates unpredictable, and to that extent, when you do that, then you would hit those who have hoarded money and wanted to make a quick kill and are not able to hold on to the dollar for a long time because they're not in a position to do so. And so they take a loss. And once that begins to happen in the market, then it will knock some sanity into the heads of the operators. I'm glad that EFCC and they are now beginning to go into the market and begin to make some arrests. Because really, lots of illegality is going on in the market. And so earlier we did that, and of course that to a large extent we mean that the market will go on the ground, but then that's a challenge which we're prepared to face. So I think that's the way to go. We need to do that. For me, that's the lowest hanging fruit, which we have to try and pluck. But of course, in the medium term, as soon as we can get over the elections, there's so many things we would have to do. The subsidy on petroleum is not sustainable. Everybody knows that. But I would expect that after the elections, there will be a political way to do that. One was also expecting that the Dangote refinery, we've been told that this refinery is ready to go into production. And so what is stopping it? So we want the refinery to come into production, and then, we take off fuel importation off our books. Now, one of the things that has compounded the foreign exchange situation is that you put in aside 30%, 40% of your available foreign exchange to import fuel. And like we said earlier on, even then, we're still having crisis in the fuel sector. Although here in Lagos, I bought fuel yesterday, it's not changed that much. So I heard you say that in Abuja, I think as the rate of purchase, the pump price has gone to 200. So I think that's a surprising. But I think that we need to buy the bullet and remove the subsidy. There's no two way about it.
Indeed.
And they capitalize, yes.
The economy. Dr. Chizia, thank you so much for your perspective this morning. There's so much to crunch, and in the coming days, we'll get back to you on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ladi. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Still to come on the program, State Department says U.S. was not informed beforehand of Brittany Griner's transfer to a Russian penal colony. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The White House says the United States will brief Taiwan on the results of a meeting next week between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters that the U.S. aim is to make Taiwan feel secure and comfortable about U.S. support. Mr. Biden is billed to meet Mr. Xi on Monday, November the 14th, on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Bali, the first time both leaders are meeting face-to-face.
Later in the day on Monday, President Biden will hold a bilateral meeting with President Xi Jinping of China. This is the first time that President Biden and President Xi will have this is the first time that they will meet face-to-face since President Biden became president. One other positive signal that we have seen was during the recent visit by the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, to the PRC, the statement on nuclear weapons and Xi Jinping specifically talking about the need to avoid the use of or even the threat of the use of nuclear weapons anywhere in the world. And in that context of that conversation, we regarded that as constructive. On the other hand, we believe that, of course, every country in the world should do more to prevail upon Russia, especially those who have relationships with Russia, to end this war and leave Ukraine. President Biden will have the opportunity to talk in detail about the Ukraine crisis during his meeting with President Xi. We'll have the opportunity as an administration to brief Taiwan on the results of that meeting, and I'm confident that they will feel very secure and comfortable in the United States' position when it comes to our support for peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and our commitment to the Taiwan Relations Act, which does commit the United States to ensuring we're providing the articles for Taiwan's defense.
Each time Ukrainian pensioner Helena Helitska prepares for her hospital treatment, she's preoccupied with a single thought: will there be enough power and water to see her through? Outages caused by Russian airstrikes on Ukraine's infrastructure can last for hours at a time, as Helitska and 27 other patients lie tied to their dialysis machines in a hospital in Obukiv, a city south of Kiev. The power cuts hit pumping stations, a particular worry for the patients whose treatments use hundreds of liters of running water. Medics do their best, but sometimes the pipes run dry and they have to curtail the life-saving treatments. Amidst the dull hum of the dialysis machines, Ms. Helitska recalled that the time last month when Russian strikes hit nearby during her treatment. We couldn't do anything since we were tied up to the equipment. We couldn't leave. Vitaly Vlashik, deputy governor of the Kyiv region in charge of healthcare, said around 60 hospitals in the area had been damaged in attacks and twice as many affected in some way by Russia's invasion. And U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said yesterday that the United States did not receive a heads up that WNBA star Brittany Griner was being transferred to a penal colony in Russia. He said it has unfortunately become standard practice on the part of the Russian Federation not to inform the U.S. ahead of time when American citizen detainees are transferred from one detention center to another. Mr. Price said the discussions with the Russians to secure the release of Ms. Griner and Paul Whelan, another American detained in Russia, are ongoing. He notes that the process has not moved quickly as desired. And reports indicate that Arsenal have made an offer for Shakhtar Donetsk star Mikhailo Mudryk. The Gunners have approached the Ukrainian club side with a £52 million offer. It appears that Mudryk is very open to a move to Arsenal, who need more depth in their wide areas. The 23-year-old continues to be linked with a January move. And finally on the program, Frankie the dinosaur has toured the media center located in the Blue Zone, where the United Nations Climate Change Conference is on the way. Frankie is urging the world to not choose extinction. While wearing a sign around his neck, Frankie and the UN observer who accompanied him say he is there to take urgent climate action. The Utahraptor dinosaur has previously toured the UN headquarters in New York, sent a video message in Glasgow, host of COP26, and stopped by to visit Egypt's pyramids in Giza before arriving in Sharm el-Sheikh. Well, I guess the message is that that might be what will happen if there's no action taken on climate change, extinction. That's where we wrap up the program this morning and for the week. Thanks for being with us. My name is There's an update of all our stories throughout the day, especially on the world today. That comes up at 5 o'clock. But for now, you have yourselves a pleasant weekend ahead. Good morning.